The last couple of days we talked about the best cards released in Wave 1. Although the first wave of the reboot had some awesome things going for it, not everything was as great as it seemed. And today we're going to talk about some of the biggest misstep Bushiroad made with card designs in Wave 1.
Stand up! Vanguard!
A lot of you asked me to do a top 10 on worst cards in the respective category, but instead of doing 3 separate videos, I'm going to talk about the worst card designs in general, which each of the 3 topics spread around in this video. Also, this is not a top 10 or a top 5 list, these are just some cards that really scream bad card design to me. And while we're at it, with bad card design, I'm not automatically talking about overpowered cards. That's just one of the potential reasons. A card can also be designed to not work with its respective deck or archetype. It can also hinder future support in fear of too strong combos, or a card breaks a fundamental game rule or mechanic. Now that that's cleared, let's get started. VRs are at the core the backbone of the respective deck. They are either strong finishers or great support cards, but in almost all scenarios they are one of the most important cards of their deck. Even weak VRs are very important to their strategy. They can either be very slow, gimmicky, or even very piece reliant, but they still fulfill their role and they can still empower their deck. Unlike the following examples, as there are still some VR that doesn't help their deck whatsoever, and in some cases might even work against it. Bluestorm Dragon Maelstrom is a prime example of badly designed VR. Overall, the card isn't weak in its own regard, but because its Aquaforce VR makes the card really bad. Aquaforce want to rush your opponent as fast as possible to put them to 4 or 5 damage, so they are forced to guard all your attacks and they can't rely on a damage trigger. But what's the result of that? Well, it means your opponent is guarding all your attack, and the fact that they are guarding your attacks means you're not hitting them anymore. This means that Maelstrom becomes a vanilla card that doesn't do anything. In fact, Maelstrom invites a less rush game plan in which you hit more for higher numbers to get that hit effect off. But the problem is that your opponent can rely on more on defensive triggers and games will last longer, which isn't great for Aquaforce as they have no sustainability. Another bad VR that doesn't do that much is Transcendence Dragon, Dragonic Novell Vogue. Kagero is a very Vanguard aggressive deck in which most of its pressure comes from its powerful grade 3 Vanguards. But Novell not only locks you out of all those powerful options, it also isn't a pressure tool itself. If all, Novell is more a defensive card and a slow one at it. It has an increased body of 15k and it negates defensive triggers and it can nuke the field. But this card has many issues with its skill. First off, it costs is to Soul Blast a grade 3 or higher, which means to activate its skill more than once, you need to run multiple copies of this card, which in itself decreases the consistency of the deck. Then next up, this card negates defensive triggers. Because you're a Force Clan means that this doesn't really impact your game plan all that much, especially for Kagero, since they don't have that many rearguards to begin with. So the only benefit is that their draw triggers or heal triggers won't activate, which isn't that impactful in most scenarios, because you aren't pressuring them all that much. And the reason why you aren't pressuring them is because this card loses 1 drive, which means you don't have a high chance to crit them. And finally, the field wipe only works when one of the players has 5 damage, and when you're relying on Novell, it's most likely you, and that established that this card is a defensive card. You know which card does things almost at the same level and can be regarded as a better card because it doesn't lock you out of your power plays? Vortex Dragon. A rare from the first set is competing with a VR 5 sets further down the line. Yeah. That's not great for a card. The final VR I want to talk about, and it's probably the worst designed VR from Wave 1, and that is Gun Salute Dragon End of Stage. This card works by emptying your soul to benefit from its skill. The only problem is that this card is in the clan which relies on the soul the most. And the support cards like Triax Chimera, which can empty the soul, won't work with it because you really need that extra Axel circle, and the only way to get that is to rewrite an extra end of stage. But when you do that, you're forced to empty your soul, meaning you remove all potential combo pieces just to get an extra Axel marker, which now doesn't serve a purpose. And 5k and a guard restricts, which doesn't mean all that much. This card works completely against what the clan wants to do, and the payoff is very minimal. If the card stated it would gain 5k for each card soul blasted or 5k for each 2 cards, then maybe this was playable as it could serve as a powerful finisher. But now it's a combo card that can't even combo with the deck. There are many bad retrains where the increase in power or reduction in skill didn't impact the meta as much as their old version did, as the game evolved much more than they did. But these retrains managed to be in fact weaker than their old versions. So in Premium, you're much better out just running the old cards. Prowling Dragonstriken wasn't that great of a card, as the moment you ride him, you would waste a turn because you can't attack, and you lose out on a drive check. The upside to this card was that your next Vanguard would have some extra pressure as it has an extra crit and 5k power. Also, it has the same power as a 10k vanilla, which means a lot of grade 2s couldn't hit it. And to top it all off, it could become a 15k defender in which your opponent didn't boost. So they were forced to call boosters which were open to retire, which is perfect for Kagero. But overall, not a great card, to be very honest. So how can you screw this one up and make a weaker retrain? Well, by making this version. First off, it didn't get any more power or shield value, which means it became a weaker card than a 10k vanilla, and Force Clans grade 2 can normally hit it now. Also, it still retained the restraint skill, and its second skill is completely identical, only it costs a counterblast now because you can draw a card. But it still only gives you 5k power in a format which all cards have increased shield value. And on top of all of that, it lost the other skill which forced your opponent to call extra units to the field to hit it. So the card lost all its upsides and retained its downsides. It's no wonder this card didn't see any play. Another bad retrain was Magical Bugstreamer. Its old version was a very situational card as you need to ride it and it needs to be dealt 3 damage that turn to get a benefit from it. In that sense, it has an 8k body makes sense. This card invites its own skill and the fact that it gives you an extra soul charge helps it. Overall, it's a bad card, but at least its design makes sense. What didn't make sense was its retrain. The only upside to this card was that it wasn't reliant on the fact that you needed to be dealt 3 damage in a turn. But that's where all the good things about this retrain ends, as its skill is increased to unusable levels. Not only do you need to use 2 counterblasts, which is way too important for a deck to waste, it also needs a discard. Pale Moon doesn't have a healthy hand size to begin with. Also, this card doesn't give you any extra soul charges, so the chance you can call 5 units is almost impossible. And at most, you're calling a bunch of grade 1s and 0s, which aren't any of you use whatsoever. Also, a big difference between the 2 cards is that the old one could be used as an anti-aggression tool. Your opponent is deterred from dealing you that extra damage to invoke your potential kill combo because it only costs 1 counterblast, which means plenty left to combo off. The new one might invoke the opposite, as you're probably going to resolve it from the first attack, and when you do, you won't even get that much out of it, so they can just force you to waste extra resources thanks to this card. The last retrain I want to talk about is, I think, the worst offender of them all, because the previous 2 examples did what they used to do, but a bit worse, so they are weaker for it in an empowered format. But this next one is just outright ridiculous. Unadulterated Sage Tarna was a great support card for the Alfred deck, as you can search out the correct Alfred for the right scenario. But when Premium started, this was one of the key components for the Blaster OTK, as they can help you with turboing your force markers. So how did they screw up this one? Well, by effectively making him the worst Royal Paladin card ever. They made him to only work with another grade 2, and on its own it didn't do anything, and the payoff was only 5k power. And to top it all off, they gave him a 9k body because its skill could be too strong for some reason. Royal's most important units are grade 2s, and to make something that weighs 2 grade 2 spots that doesn't do anything on its own is almost insulting to the old version. Luckily, they didn't screw up with Wonder Azel as hard as they did with Tarna. Another retrain I want to point out is Silent Tom, but not for the reason that you're thinking of. A lot of people can argue that the old Silent Tom is stronger as it forces your opponent to guard with only grade 1s, bronze and higher. And with the increase of shield values on triggers and draw PGs, you can say that that's the case. However, I think by changing its skill to the new version was one of the better decisions, because now Silent Tom isn't a problem card for OTT, and they won't be shafted with future support, as any good power-up skill won't break Silent Tom. So on the surface, Silent Tom might look as a bad retrain, but in fact it's an amazing retrain. Besides bad retrains or bad VRs, there are also just cards that are plainly badly designed. These are cards that either don't work or break the game in some kind of form, regardless if they are good or bad retrains. These cards mainly follow the rules that I set up at the beginning of this video. The first card I want to talk about is Unite Attacker. This card just didn't seem to get the memo what the V-Series Spike Brothers was about. This card can check top 5 and call any cards among them to the field and give a small power boost. The cost for its skill makes it very unreliable as a first right target, as yes, you have plenty cards that help you with Fill the Soul, but their timing and condition makes it what unreliable to hit 7. It is also competing with Siegfried for the Vanguard spot, and Siegfried gives way more value as a Vanguard. But besides that, this card calls a new field in the main phase. The only problem is, Spike is all about building a field, so you most likely already have that field you need, and it also only checks the top 5, so chances are very low you hit something good. But when we look at the support cards, we can see even a more apparent problem with this card. Your aggressive power cards all search them out from the deck. So it's very likely by the time that you can resolve its skill to get some value out of it, you already called most of your strong attackers and there is nothing left in your deck to hit. But besides a card that doesn't work with its deck, we also have a card that's been way too strong for its own good. I'm of course referring to Victorious Deer. It got the top spot for best new units for a reason. This card's problem lies in the fact that 1, it is also a rear guard, and 2, it gives your field an entire power boost. OTT can stall very easily till late game and make some insane power lanes and crits swinging left and right, and this card lies in the center of that. But this card could have been balanced with multiple options. For one, they could make the power increase only apply if it's on the Vanguard circle, or give it only plus 5k power when it's called as a rearguard unit. They could also make the condition that if you hit no crit triggers, that only then you would gain a power boost. Many of these changes would make the card way less problematic, and can even give the card room to grow with future support. Finally, I want to talk about Phantom Black. Phantom Black is such a card which in itself isn't really strong or unbalanced, but because it exists, it can really hamper the future support for Mega Colony. Silent Tom, for example, is its own enclosed thing. Its power only stays with this unit. In most cases, it can only increase in direct power. Phantom Black, being a booster, is unrestricted. It can give this guard restriction to any unit, grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, even grade 0s and grade 4s, meaning that Bushiroad needs to take in consideration that this card exists when making new cards. And Lion is already pushing the limits, and it's safe to say we are unlikely going to see a stronger combo card with Phantom Black in the next support wave. These were in my opinion the big card design mistakes that Bushiroad made in the first wave of the reboot. I've tried to withhold myself to talk about Waterfall, as I talked about that card for many times on the channel, and I think it's time to put that one to rest. Of course, your opinion can differ, and you might have some other cards you think Bushiroad missed their mark on. So let me know in the comments down below which cards you think are badly designed from wave 1. As always, I want to thank my supporters over at Patreon for making this video possible. You guys are amazing. If you do want to support the channel, then head over to patreon.com/VanguardInsider and become a patron today. But with that said, I'm Mr. Time Leap, and I'll see you guys in the next one.